So I'm going to talk about Kruger generally, not only in Mpumalanga, because I don't think it makes sense just to separate out some of the area. I'm just going to touch on some context to put the whole project and alien species work in context, and look at a few ongoing projects, and Parthenium especially. I know it's a big concern across the region. Some biocontrol work that's happening, some new species and populations that we're very worried about, and we need some regional support and input, and then invasive alien animals. And I haven't really reported on invasive animals before, but now with a whole lot of fairly recent introductions, I thought that I'd mention some of the other species that we're dealing with. So just to put this in context, Kruger is about just under 20,000 square kilometers. It's nearly the size of Israel. It's about 360 k's from here, from north to south, and that's almost as far as from here to Pretoria. So that just gives an idea of what we're trying to deal with and the extent of the problems that fall within our area. So it's a big area, it's a big conservation area, but it still falls with, it's just still an island within a larger landscape. And if we look at the left, it just illustrates the different land use types, from urban areas to other conservation areas, rangelands and plantation forestry. And all those have different kinds of alien species associated with them, different densities. We have a large river network that goes through the park, 7 major rivers from north to south, and then of course a network of tributaries. And that drains from up to 200 kilometers away from the park. So even things that are happening far from us are influencing us. We know roads are an important pathway as well, and we have a large network around us and obviously going through the park. It seems not to be one of the major pathways in Kruger, except for Parthenium, but we still have a network that needs to be monitored. And we have these different land use types that I mentioned, but if we look at the border, this is right along 500 meters from the park border, urban areas, with all the pressures they associate with, commercial agriculture, different kinds of focus areas, rangelands. These may have different species. In the north, we're now finding a lot of cactaceae up there. And then a little bit further away in the escarpment, there's the commercial plantations. So all these have different pressures on what we're trying to do inside the park. So it's a big regional problem. If we just look at all those pathways and rivers, we mapped it out on quaternary catchments. You can see the high species richness of alien plants. So those zones in darker red with a higher richness or number of high priority species, you can clearly see the pathways down. But it still means that there's a lot of species that are outside the park that can come into the park. And the Sand Parks estate is even bigger. It's, I think, 3.9 million. I mean, what's it? Kruger's 20,000 square kilometers, and the rest of the park's about another 19. So we've got projects scattered across all 19 national parks. So all the funding that we get for working for water and other alien clearing programs has to be distributed across priorities in all the parks. And the 5 parks with the highest priorities were identified as Garden Route, Table Mountain, Agulhas, and then Kruger and Adder. And that's obviously because of high biodiversity issues. In the Western Cape, you've got the fynbos, you've got forests, natural forests, and those areas, so it's high biodiversity risk areas. Kruger has also got specific needs associated with it, therefore, and it's a bigger area, so a lot of money is still being spent in those regions. So this is just some of the ongoing projects that we have. I showed that was working for water funding that was being used, but when we added on other funding that has been put into alien clearing and going back even further, a study showed that about 350 million rand has been spent on alien plant control in Kruger over time. So it's been an enormous effort, but there's still aliens and we're still trying to work on it. So it's an ongoing, it's not a 2 or 3 or 4 follow-up process, it's an ongoing long-term program. And this gives an idea of overall management zones that have been worked, the rivers that have been covered. This is for now 20 years about. The bigger grey areas are either cactus areas or Parthenium or other species. But in the last couple of years, the focus has moved a bit to the north and the southwestern area. But if I zoom into the north, you can see most of the work now is happening on our boundary, along the western boundary. So trying to target those areas adjacent to us where we know there are species. We know, for example, there's now Parthenium on the upper Llewellyn River catchment, which is a fairly new record that we found. We also know, as I mentioned, there's new cactus species up there, and other plants. A bit further down around the upper Letaba catchment, a number of species coming down that, and then around Palabora, of course, there's many different species associated with that area, and that can come down a number of streams into the park. In the south, a lot of work around the streams and that flow into the Sabia River, trying to put a focus around some of those areas. That's a mixture of species that can be ongoing lantana. That's been the focus for the last 30 years or more. There's Chromalina, and well, there's many species that they're working on. And then the Ntsakaz system, that part of the park, the boundary is shared. It's a river system. And there's many drainage lines that are coming into the park from that area, and many of them come from urban areas or semi-urban areas. So we're trying to put a program in place to prevent further introductions in the long term. These are some of the figures that I was given for funding in areas that have been covered the last couple of years. Hectares, I just put together the initial and follow-up area that's been covered, but it's been around, well, it's fluctuated, especially with COVID and the effects, but from around 22 million down to about 14 million spent on working for water alien control. This excludes Kruger teams. Kruger's got an alien biota team that does rapid response and monitoring, so it excludes that. We've got a program that focuses purely on Parthenium because it's such a big concern to us and has been for a while, and that's been around 8 or 9 million rand a year, so it's been a fairly big program. And then what we have is a monitoring team that we started a few years ago, so it doesn't have hectares. But we've actually got teams that go out and GPS plants across the park. Now, it takes a long time. It's quite a slow process. So there's been some teams in the south right up to the north. And if we find new species, they'll go out and try and map it as widely as possible. Or do mapping along the rivers to try and get an accurate representation of what species are present and what abundance it is, so that we can better inform our management plans in the long term. And it's been, it seems to be costly, but it's an extremely efficient program because we now are starting to set a baseline for what we have, and over time we can monitor that and see if it changes and whether we're making progress with it. So this is a Parthenium. The photo comes from the southwest of the park near Crocodile Bridge in the drainage line. So it's perfect habitat. And there's been most of it to be focused on through a chemical control program. You can see the extent of the invasion. This is along the Crocodile River. It fluctuates every year, quite substantially according to the rainfall, but it's widely spread, and many of you will know Parthenium very well. But it is one of our bigger concerns. And this is just to illustrate the spread. This is around 2003, some of the first records. Those lines in brown were surveys. So we had all those roads driven, and the Parthenium there plotted in red. And then over time, from 2014, we had surveys that were carried out, and we've now got the situation where we've got fairly wide cover across the south. It's important to realize, though, those plants, that the records that we found each year is not because we either eradicated the plants, hopefully we did have some effect, but it's also because of the very seasonal nature of the plants. Some years they come up in some areas and other years in other areas. But overall, it's quite widely spread now across the Crocodile River and the Sabi River, and outside of the park to the west of us. We haven't yet found it much further north than the Sabi River. We also have a biocontrol program. In fact, some more insects will be released tomorrow using Zygocramna. We're trying to, they're fairly habitat specific or niche specific, so we're releasing in the Crocodile Bridge area, around Skakuza, and then some other areas around the Sabi. So there's a number of sites. There are other agents. There's a rust fungus that's been released around Crocodile Bridge and Skakuza, but the aim is to try and put some insects out there, see if they can establish and determine what levels of control we can get in the long term. Ornamental plant control has been a challenge, and has been a long challenge. And these flowers are very typical of what we had in the park. Fortunately, we can say we don't have all these anymore. In the early 2000s, we did a survey of some of the camps of the park, and you can see we found 30 or so plants in some of the camps. Kruger, Skakuza, we found over 200 species. And then after that, we drafted a policy or protocol on the removal of alien ornamentals and the use of them in landscaping in Kruger. So no alien species may not be used in tourist camps, and there's different phase policies for taking them out of staff gardens and elsewhere in the park. And then we followed up with a survey in 2020 to see how effective it had been. And we found that the number of plants did go up from about just 200 species that we were listed as a bit more of concern, and it's now gone up to over 400. But there's different categories that we listed. So this first, and it's not very clear, but this first column is what are the nationally legislated species. So one of the first points in our policy is that anything that was listed in CARA and later NEMBA when that came out is prohibited in Kruger. So in almost all cases, we've removed all the legislated species. We then had a list of what we called locally regulated species, so species that we were concerned about, we added to the list, and that had to be removed. So, as not too bad either, some of the camps had fewer species or stayed the same. So we were starting to get some response there. What we did have is other species, what we called unregulated species, but it hasn't been separated out in this graph, but that does include certain herbs that people are using perhaps to grow food and that. But there have been an increase in the number of species, but the important ones for us were to get rid of the legislated species and the additionally listed species that we did for ourselves. But what's important and is hard to show in these data is that the overall abundance of the plants is reduced. So you could go through an area that looked like a tropical garden anywhere in the country, and now You may find the species, so it gets listed, but the abundance is very low, or maybe one individual. So it's been fairly effective. It's obviously a work in progress, and we will continue with it. Biological control, and there'll be more about biocontrol after me, but there may be some overlap. But some of our programs that have been successful, the prickly pear, South prickly pear, Punta stricta, it was found first in the Kruger area in the 1950s, reportedly, and then spread to an area of, the management units cover just under 70,000 hectares now. So most of the work initially was focused on chemical control, then later it was followed up with the biocontrol Cactoblastis cactorum, or the Cactoblastis moth. The effect of that wasn't as high as was seen in other areas of the country and in Australia, for example. And then in the late 90s, the cochineal was released. And after, in one area where it was first released, within a year, we had extremely good success. So we decided to start mass rearing the insects in a tunnel, and then instead of going out with knapsack sprayers to spray the plants, the teams would go out with a cochineal and release it and onto the plant. And we had, so this is an example of a plant that had cochineal released on it, and probably within a year or so it looked like that. And there were other long-term sites. This was a research site, and all the plants were completely removed. So it's now become our main control program for a Punta stricta. Water lettuce is still a problem in some areas of the park. Water weeds are generally quite a challenge, but Sunset Dam initially had, and in the Sabi River itself and other areas, chemical control, but it was later changed to biological control. And after a period of about 6 years of fluctuating from complete cover to complete open, it eventually stayed open. We think that's because the seed bed eventually had to be exhausted. So every year the seeds germinated, but they weren't able to reseed, and the plants eventually were taken out. Open dam is still a big problem. It's covered at the moment. It's been sprayed over time. There's many challenges with spraying there. There's hippos and crocodiles, very big ones in open dam. And we've used different control methods. And the difficulty is it's a seasonally flooding river. So you put the biocontrol in, and it washes away, and then the plants regrow the next year, and we need to start over with them. So we're still struggling with that. We have a similar problem with water hyacinth, and initially it was controlled using chemical control. This is actually in the Letaba River. The Crocodile River is a bit different. Dillian will talk about that, but we were doing chemical control up there. Again, the problem is that the plants get washed away in floods, the insects get washed away with them, or the plants reseed, so then we get stuck. So we keep on getting these annual or bit longer cycle regrowth. So then the additional biocontrol agents were released, and the one that's been there for a while is Neocotina. And we are finding some level of control, some damage to the plants, and then more recently the Megamelus, which has quite a big impact on the plants, but it's a fairly new introduction. So we need to augment those introductions with new populations and give it a bit of time to see what's happening. So new species is really where some of our concerns are. This is not a new species. Water hyacinth has been in the park for a long time, but 2 years ago we found it in the Sabi River for the first time ever, and it's now throughout the length of the Sabi River, but we don't know where it's coming from. We found it at that weir with that pump station. It's not an active pump station, but we don't know. but now we sit with hyacinth in the river there. And getting into the Sabia River to control is not very easy. Kutsu vine was found earlier this year. It's a very big worry. Some of you will know the species. And what was concerning is we found plants 5 meters up already. They were seeding. The success of the seeds is fairly low, but it was still succeed as seeding. So it is already in the system. So that's a major worry for us. And if you look at this photo, okay, this is from the origin, which I think was near Sitwala Caves, and in that valley, I'm not completely certain. Near plantations, the photo B on the right is the riparian area. So I don't think it will spread across the landscape in Kruger, but very definitely it's got a good chance of spreading along our rivers. In fact, it wasn't long after that when we started looking, we started finding it's popping up, and that's only since March. So this is, and then also a few kilometers to the west of the park. So we're now very worried about this, and I think it needs a fairly good regional approach if we're going to keep this away. The other one is Pereskia. It's a horrible thing. It was found, I think, 2 years ago on our western boundary. If I just zoom in, it's 10 kilos from the park border. This will most definitely be very happy and at home in Kruger. So we're very, very worried about this, and also trying to do mapping and pull together any records that we find so that we can work with neighboring areas and control it. Some animals. I'm just going to illustrate, just show some pictures of what we have and what we're dealing with. Myna, many of you have seen Myna. We now found them throughout most of the camps in the park, although we have been doing some management, but still they are there. The Terebia snail, the map doesn't have any dots on because all the waterways probably will have dots. It's widely spread, and it forms extremely high densities in areas, and of course with high eutrophication and algae forming, we get even better habitat for them. Carp, common carp seems to come and go, or it's not been found for a while. Silver carp we know is still in the Olifants River. Mozambique tilapia, the Nile tilapias in the north, there have been hybrids found, I believe, some time ago. There's a suspected one near Pabeni Gate a few years ago, but it was never confirmed. Smallmouth bass, just in 2019 near Pabeni. Largemouth bass 2 years ago near Malalant and Boshwea. Mosquito fish 2 years ago in the Olifants River near Olifants Camp at a weir there. And then 2017, and then again now, the red claw crayfish. So suddenly we're getting a whole suite of things that some were there, but now we're just in the last few years, we've got this whole new onslaught of alien animals. And there's still further, the Plecostomus was also reported. The Polyphagus shottle borer is not yet in Kruger. We've got a trapping system throughout the park in collaboration with Cropwatch, and so far we can say fortunately no insects have been found in the park. We've got an extensive trapping network. We have awareness posters up, and have also done training with different guides and other staff to recognize or at least look for signs so that can be reported to someone that can go and collect beetles and then investigate further. There have, however, been some records, fairly recent, slight courtesy of Rudolph, around the area. These were from macadamia plantations, I believe, but okay, within, not too far from the park, but so far not detected in the park. So, a summary, we're trying to put in place a multifaceted approach. there's a huge range of problems. We have the ongoing long-term projects that will stay with us. We're focusing on the park boundary, surveillance and rapid response as where we can, monitoring alien animals, most of those we can't manage, and then ornamental alien plant control will carry on. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Foxcroft. I just wonder, how did that crayfish get there? He couldn't have walked all the way from Australia. I mean, it's mind-boggling to think how things eventually end up in the waterways and who drops them there in the first place.
Well, they have been imported for aquaculture. Which channel and how it got into the park, I'm not sure, but I think it came in from a side channel, probably from some dams in the region. But further than that, I'm not sure. I know there's been some work done on it. But,
Very interesting. Are there any questions for Doctor before we move on to the next? There we go. Sandy?
No, not Sandy. DFFE. Thanks, Doc. Thanks for the presentation. You've mentioned that the Parthenium, it's a problem plant, and you have released the beetle for that. My question is, the beetle, when it has finished eating the Parthenium, don't you foresee any problems starting to invade on other species? I know you did a research for that, but I'm just concerned that once it's finished chowing the Parthenium, it might chow other species as well. And again, the way the beetle is controlling the Parthenium, when I saw the slide there, it's chowing the leaves. So that Parthenium doesn't spread through the roots or the seeds, because I saw it chowing the leaves. You will also clarify me for that. Yeah, thank you.
okay, I'll answer the second question first. So there's a few agents that have been released. Some of them are leaf feeders, and I think there are some that feed on the stem. So those were illustrative, those insects that we've released. What it does do is it puts a plant under stress, and often they can't reproduce further. Some of them actually defoliate the plant completely. So that's the level kind of control that you'll get. Other agents might work differently. On the release and the non-target effect of biocontrol, so the biocontrol is tested through the Plant Protection Research Institute and other academic institutions like Rhodes Biocontrol Center. And they go through a process of making sure that it doesn't move on to any other species as host specificity testing. So basically they have to show that virtually the insects will die out if the plants are absent. The plants will never disappear though, even if the insects completely remove them, because the insects track the population dynamics of the plants. So the plants will drop down, the insects will drop down as well. But if there is some regeneration of plants, there's always seeds or other introduction, they will then re-emerge with it. So no, we're not concerned with that. The experts who work with biocontrol have done all the testing. They do it in quarantine facilities and labs to make sure it's contained. And by the time we get to use it, it's been through all the processes and permits issued for release.
Here we go. Question?
Yeah, Jacoba with Dongo, I'm a state vet. Do you have any known problems with domestic cats?
Cats aren't allowed in the park. They've been prohibited for some time. There are some cases where they do get found on the border of the park, for example, Palabora. So they are removed if they need to be, but we haven't found any cats inside the park for a while. We did do a study looking at hybridization, and at this stage the population still seems to be quite pure, the wild cats.
I think the domestic cats have got a bit of competition in the park, and ones which are a little bit bigger.
I think I'm loud enough without the mic, but doesn't matter. Llewellyn, the shot-hole borer and the normal wood borers, is there any way, how can we distinguish whether this hole was made by a shot-hole borer or is there any external way of identifying what is what?
It's very difficult to identify unless you're a specialist in it. We have numerous borer beetles.
Yeah, exactly.
South African. So if there are some signs of one, then it's better to get hold of somebody who's a specialist or is connected to the network of borer beetle experts, and they can take a sample and have it collected. Now they normally send it for genetic testing to make absolutely certain.
Do you actually take the wood rather to cut the tree off, or how do you, is that the best way?
Take small samples from it and then try and get the insect as well.
Okay.
Fabi website. It's got a list of how to do it.
On the
Fabi
Fabi.
website.
Yeah,
Fabi.
Pretoria University at the Fabi.
But one of the ways that you can almost say for sure is the weeping aspect of the hole, because that's the fungus that leaves a stain, and not all other borers do that. So that's sort of one way of sort of eliminating it, but not entirely. Where were we next? Who's got the mic? Warren, over at the top. And then who's next? I saw a hand in front. There we go.
Hi everyone, I'm Rudolph from Cropwatch. Just to answer, how can you distinguish between is a shot-hole borer or normal borer? If you use a pen, that ball pointed in the front, if that fits into the hole, it's not shot-hole borer. If you use a toothpick, that point of the toothpick, if it can go in, then it's shot-hole borer.
Big. Are we talking
So
big?
it's a very, very tiny hole. So if a toothpick point can fit into the hole, then it's a 90% surety that it's shot-hole borer.
I like practical solutions.
Can you tell? I'm hearing that you're doing lots on traps. Can you tell us what you're doing on traps?
Okay, for our trapping, as Dr. Llewellyn mentioned, we've got a trapping grid in the park. I think it's now running for 3 years almost, where we haven't intercepted shot-hole borer, and the whole aim of the traps within the park, it's at the entrance gates and at almost all the camps. So if shot-hole borer enters the Kruger Park, we've got a very high possibility of intercepting it. The other slide that Dr. Llewellyn showed was part of a macadamia project to see what type of bark borers are present in macadamias. And we added shot-hole borer as maybe there is, and we definitely caught them there. And our assumption is that for shot-hole borer overall in the country, there's small pockets of monitoring, and again, as mentioned throughout the day, each one has got their own silo, they do their own monitoring. And I think for shot-hole borer, it's important that whoever works on shot-hole borer, we can collaborate on that and have more grids out, not only in agricultural, but in urban areas as well, to know the extent. And I'm pretty sure for Limpopo, everyone says there's no shot-hole borer. I beg to differ. I believe there are shot-hole borer. We just need to go and trap for them. If you don't trap for the pest, you won't know if it's there. So yeah, we're keen to work with anyone who's willing to.
And we've heard a rumour that agriculture is buying 3,000 traps from you. Will they be available to anyone here, or is agriculture going to keep them to themselves?
Oh, that's news to me. Thank you. I must just mention, yeah, the traps that's on the slide, that was the original big black panel traps. We've got great success with them. They don't work in the Western Cape. They just become kites with the winds, and we've got a lot of bycatches because it's so big. So we modified it using a normal 2-liter Coke bottle and a 500 ml bottle. And if you guys want, I can send you the schematics of that so you can build your own traps. And we've got the pheromones on the research permit. So if you need pheromones or attractants, we can also supply you that so that we can really see where the distribution of this pest is and share that information across all government departments and also among ourselves. And yes, for the
Last question.
yes.
Apparently the female doesn't need any males to mate, so why would the pheromones work?
Well, it's attractant more than a pheromone. So the shuttle borer is attracted to that smell. So in other agricultural pests where you get a pheromone, the male is attracted, so they would think there's a female inside the trap. But for this is an attractant, so it attracts the shuttle borer by default. You also get a repellent, which I know guys in the Cape are busy testing to see if it actually repels the beetle from the tree. So the beetle won't enter the tree as it thinks there's already a colony in the tree. So, thank you.
That's fantastic information. Thank you so much.
Just using the facilities we have here.
Thank you, Dr. Foxcroft, for that informative presentation. I just wanted to quickly ask something regarding Kruger. We actually got the alert from Tembeka, but you also mentioned that they've also recorded it outside the park, around the Bushback Ridge site. I did engage with her that we'll actually try to thoroughly survey those sites. Just you did mention that you've actually, the population that you spotted, it was actually seeding, even though the seed count was actually low. Can I actually ask which month it was actually recorded? Because I've been actually unlucky in actually finding seeds in any of the populations that we currently have in Mpumalanga.
It was in March.
How much?
There was just a few seeds on the plant. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? I think we're done. This is why it's so important to have these forum meetings that we can share vital information. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Doctor. We appreciate it. Let's give Doctor a round of applause for the valuable work they're doing in Kruger National Park.